And
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight for our Navigating College Admissions Test program. My name's Kim McGee, and I'm one of the post-secondary counselors at Deerfield High School. On behalf of District 113, we truly appreciate you being here. For those who may want to revisit this presentation, a recording will be available in a few days on each school's CCRC website. Additionally, to help you get ready for the statewide ACT, Compass will be hosting a free practice ACT for District 113 on November 1st and November 2nd. Please mark your calendars now, and registration details will be forthcoming. It's my pleasure to welcome our speaker this evening, Eric Anderson from Compass Education Group. Compass has been providing top quality one-on-one test prep and academic tutoring for over 25 years. They serve thousands of students both online and in person around the world, including right here in the Chicagoland area. In my experience, Compass stands out for their ethical, knowledgeable, and thoughtful approach, not only in helping our students succeed, but also in keeping schools and counselors up to date on the latest strategies to advise students effectively. A bit about our speaker. Eric graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Illinois, where he captained U of I's nationally ranked handball team and was the first Rhodes Scholarship campus nominee in nearly a decade. After graduation, he worked with the Discovery Channel, MTV Networks, Sony Pictures, and YouTube. Eric discovered his passion for education while working with Compass's Southern California team as an ACT and SAT math tutor. In 2019, he made it his mission to bring Compass's expertise back to the Midwest. Outside of test prep, Eric enjoys triathlons, grilling, and being an avid reader. Each year, he and his colleagues speak at over 300 high schools and professional organizations, helping to demystify the ACT and SAT while easing student anxiety about testing. We are so fortunate to have Eric with us tonight. So without further ado, I want you to join me in welcoming Eric Anderson.
thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. Everyone, thanks for joining. What a way to kick off your week, right? With an hour of testing goodness. I promise that I will make this as pain-free as possible, but I don't want to overpromise because in truth, you can do everything right, and this is still not a stress-free process. You can reduce stress by making some wise calls up front, and we'll talk about what the right thing to do is on different key decisions along the way. But just know that this is a kind of a silly hump to jump through to get to the real prize, which is the college where your student will feel fulfilled. Tests are around, they're important enough to do well in that they're worthwhile to put some thought into up front. So a lot of what I will be covering is covered ad nauseum in our voluminous guide to college admission testing. I've heard this called the Bible to college admission testing. I've also heard it called a big bundle of stress. Sorry, it's 106 pages. It clocks in at just over a pound. If you want the coffee table glossy version of it, I'm happy to send you a paper copy and just send me an email, eric@compassprep.com. Um, but you can dip into and out of this as you move along through, if you're a 10th grader, through the rest of your sophomore and junior year, 11th grader, through the rest of your junior year, really all the way up until fall of senior year, which we'll call that the soft finish line to admission testing for an obvious reason. That's when you got to start sending in your applications. But there's good stuff in here even up to then. For instance, if I talk a little bit breezily tonight about what's an early action and early decision deadline, and you want to know more about that, you can go in here and find that out. Here's basically what the roadmap is for tonight, and it's meant to be in 1 hour, the roadmap for the next 2 years if you're a sophomore, next year if you're a junior. Basically, you have to make the best call you can around these 5 decisions. And there are guidelines to do it better ways and worse ways, I would say. That being said, it's impossible for anyone to give you the answer to each of these 5 because, in truth, the best plan is the one that's right for your teenager. And we all know teenagers have different college goals, they have different test preferences, they have complex schedules, which are different than their peers. So resist the temptation to base your planning off of, say, what someone living next to you did, or what an older classmate did, or what a cousin did. What worked for them may have been right for their time and their goals, but may not be exactly right for you. I do have some universal advice, and that is this, which is number two, everyone should be taking practice testing before they crack open a book, before they start doing any kind of formal studying. Our credo at Compass is that test preparation without practice testing is not test preparation. And it's amazing how often this is ignored. So this year, to really help you follow through with this onerous task, your wonderful college counseling team has designated a weekend where we are making a diagnostic ACT exclusively available to you, Highland Park and Deerfield students, for free. And you can take it, we suggest 9 a.m. to simulate the testing experience, but technically it's available that entire weekend. Please follow through with this. If you're a junior, you will take the PSAT if you opt into it on the October 18th, and then you can take this practice ACT. By the time you have both scores back, you will have the data you need to determine whether ACT or SAT is a better fit for you. If you're a sophomore, this is just an opportunity to dip your toe into the testing waters in a no stakes, low pressure, scores don't count at all opportunity to do that. So mark your calendars for that. I want to start out just by tackling the question why. Why do these exams exist? Why have they existed for many, many decades? In fact, why have they existed for, in the SAT's case, a century? That's right. The College Board, who authors AP exams, but also SAT, has been in this business for a century. They started this in the roaring 20s. And colleges have, maybe it's too strong a word to say, been addicted to exams ever since. Certainly right now, many have eschewed completely exams, while others have re-embraced them. You saw some of the different policies if you got here a few minutes early in the pre-show. But for the most part, these exams have really withstood quite a lot. And I would say the greatest challenge to these exams was what we saw a few years ago with the pandemic. And yet, I'm still here. My full-time job, which I really, really enjoy, is in helping families like yourself get the best resources for these assessments because colleges still have an appetite for them. Colleges have more of an appetite for grades. Of course they do. What you do day in, day out over 3 years at your rigorous high schools will matter more than what you do for 3 hours on a Saturday morning, for instance, or Sunday morning when you're taking one of these exams. And yet, for all their virtues, grades have their blind spots too. And what I'm showing you is the chief blind spot of grades. Too many A's. The average GPA in the United States is a 4.0. Said another way, an average GPA is a perfect GPA. So what are you to do if you work at the University of Michigan and you receive 100,000 applications and you can let in 20,000 of those students and nearly everybody has great grades? So colleges use test scores because as crude an instrument as they are, and they are crude, they don't really measure the important things in life, like IQ, curiosity, sense of humor. But for as crude as they are, they at least provide what they call a standard common yardstick. So wherever you take the test, whether you take the test on the September test date or the June test date, whether you took it 3 years ago, or if you take it 3 years in the future, this bell curve distribution I'm showing you, that will play out again and again and again. This is by design. And the people who author these exams, they have a title called a psychometrician. They know how to design an exam so that students are simply sorted. And you're sorted from anywhere from a 1 to a 36. And following this, the most common question that my colleagues and I hear is, okay, it's a bell curve, but then what's a good score? And unfortunately, there's no clear answer here because colleges have wildly different appetites for different score levels. I'm going to actually show you, this is one of our popular resources. If anyone wants to put into the Q&A your alma mater maybe, or a college your teenager wants to apply to, we can go ahead and look it up. For now, I'll go ahead and look up the title slide school, which is University of Wisconsin-Madison. And what I'm showing you here is Madison's middle 50. So we'll look at the ACT column, ACT total 25th to 75th percentile. Colleges report this to give students somewhat of a sense of how their score is blending in with everyone else's. Being a really selective institution, of course, it's no surprise that Madison has extremely high, even average score ranges. A way to interpret this is that 25% of matriculating students to Madison have a 34, 35, or 36. 25% have top 5% scores. 50% of students have a 29, 30, 31, 32, or 33, and then 25% have anywhere from a 1 all the way to a 29. So it's a mistake to see superseding that 75th percentile threshold, in other words, getting a 34 as a golden ticket score. Those really don't exist, not at selective institutions. It's also, though, a mistake to see anything beneath a 29 as an auto deny. That's not true either. I bring this up simply because you'll have to contend with a tricky question at some point, which is when is enough enough? When are you not seeing any more score gains for the effort you're putting into these? And when can you resist the temptation to fall into higher just for the sake of being higher and say, okay, I'm good enough for the schools that I want to apply to. And good enough means at a school like Madison, roughly, being able to be in that 29 to 33 range. And that gets a little more complicated because test optional policies have sort of inflated that range a little bit. But I think it's safe to say that if you're in range, then the best you can do at a selective school is get a shoulder shrug out of a busy admissions reader. They'll say, okay, good enough. Sure, that's your score, whatever. And then at least move you on to a deeper read, a second or third round, where the more interesting human parts of your application have a better shot of shining through. And thank you. We did get some interesting uh, colleges. Do I see two votes for Penn State? Oh, just one. Well, let's look at Penn State. They're going to be pretty similar to Madison. There's Penn State's, this one right here. But you can see a little different too. Instead of a 29 to 33, 27 to 32. Someone also put in Tufts. We'll take a look at that. Tufts even higher. Here, the 75th percentile score at Madison is the 25th percentile score. And someone put in what I call a purple unicorn school. Here's Harvard. They require the exam. And here you can see that a full 25% of the matriculating students had a perfect 36. So really selective. I hope this reveals that super competitive scores really aren't that impressive, not to people who work at these institutions. They see high scores as basically a dime a dozen. So really the art of sound test preparation is knowing that, making sure that you're not putting an extra cent or second into this than it deserves. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the deck for a second. All right, and thanks so much for the questions, everyone. We'll have time for some of those too at the end if we don't answer them as we go. The first choice that you need to make is whether ACT or SAT is a better fit for you. Just because the state of Illinois requires that students here at public schools take the ACT to graduate doesn't necessarily mean that's the exam you need to prepare for and the scores you need to furnish for your college applications. In fact, a full 50% of you probably do better on the SAT for a variety of reasons, but the only way to figure out whether ACT or SAT is a better fit is to borrow a page from NASA, which is "In God We Trust, All Others Bring Data." And this is the time where you need to bring data. That data comes from baseline exams. Again, your PSAT that you can take if you're a junior on 1018. If you're not doing that, get in touch with us. We'll set you up with a practice test of that as well, and the practice ACT that we're hosting 11.1 and 11.2. A look at the PSAT and SAT reveals an exam structure that is a digital stage adaptive assessment. So All students take a combination of reading comprehension and grammar editing questions in Verbal Module 1. Depending on their performance, they get routed one of two ways. Stronger scoring students get directed toward Verbal 2B, where, again, they get more reading comprehension and grammar editing questions, but now the questions are harder. Softer scoring students get routed to Verbal 2A, which, again, more reading comp, more grammar editing, but the questions are easier. The way that this works, think of it like a microscope where the test goal is to bring your score into focus, and it has to slot you on one of 121 different scores from a 400 to a 1600 in increments of 10. So the first stage is like the course focus knob. Does this student kind of fall in a 600, 700 range or a 400, 500 range? We're not sure yet, but that's what the first verbal module is going to do. And then for stronger scoring students, the second stage is sort of like the fine focus knob. Does this student get a 620 or a 650? Not sure. But to parse out with that degree of precision without losing the reliability and validity of the exam scores, what the test has to do is cluster those students together into, say, a 650 to 700 range, and then give them fairly similarly difficult questions so that some miss some of them, and so that it does have that spread of who gets a 650, a 660, a 670, and so on. The College Board delivers this type of assessment because it is shorter than what the ACT is doing, which is this. The ACT is delivering what is called a linear assessment. Every single student has to march through the same sequence of bubbles. Until very recently, there were 215 bubbles every student had to march through in just under 3 hours. This was the classic version of the ACT that I took in high school, and that has been around for 35 years. That changed, and it changed this past April and selectively, and then changed wholesale this September. So now, for current juniors, the only exam you're going to see is what I'm showing you here, the enhanced version of the ACT. ACT had a problem on their hands. Students were flocking to the SAT. Why? Because it was a 2-hour, 14-minute assessment compared to a 2-hour, 55-minute assessment. They were losing out on test taker dollars, in other words. So they had to change fast. So what do? They make their science section optional. That saves 35 to 40 minutes. And then they chop off 10 minutes from the English and the math section and make the reading actually a little bit longer. So now the 3 required sections, English, math, and reading, are 2 hours and 5 minutes. And haha, they win, right? We're shorter than your exam, SAT. We're going to lure more test takers to us. Not so fast, because if you're taking the optional science section, that puts 40 minutes back onto testing time. And so now the exam is 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is only 10 minutes shorter than the classic ACT was in the first place. So the question quickly becomes, should you be taking optional science or should you not be? Well, for students in Illinois, you're going to be taking the science section. The state of Illinois and the ACT made their contract before this change was announced. And part of the impetus for their contract, which is going to last another 5 years, for why all students need to take the ACT, is the science section. Prior to that, students had to take a separate science assessment when it was the SAT that was the statewide exam. So you're taking the science, and that's just what it is. But what if you take the test outside of the April exam? That is the one that is required for you to take. Should you keep opting into science? It's very much a case-by-case question, but when in doubt, opt into it. The reason is we're still seeing college policies come into focus. Most schools have said nothing about what they're going to do with the science section yet, but because some, Boston University, Pomona, have said they're requiring it, Georgetown also, of course, surprising nobody. They've always had a torrid love affair with the standardized tests. Because some are already saying, yes, we are requiring science, all things being equal, opt into it. If you have a college list that is constructed of schools that are less selective or definitely not going to be requiring it, that gives you a little more latitude to say no to it. When you're registering for the test, then our guidance is opt into the paper version of the exam as much as you can. This is simply more prevalent And I'm talking about national test days, not the April statewide exam. Like I said, opt into the science section in general. You don't need to take the writing section. No college cares about it. If you're going to be taking it digitally, though, you have another decision to make. Do you want to take it at a site that provides the computer for you, or do you want to bring your own device? If you're going to do bring your own device, keep in mind that you can use a desktop or laptop, but you can't use tablets, no iPads, no external mice, or at least they haven't said anything about external mice or keyboards just yet, which I hope is revealing that right now, ACT Gateway, the online platform for digital delivery of the ACT, is behind College Board's Blue Book. Be careful with it. For instance, ACT Gateway, you need internet for 100% of your testing time. If it goes out, you lose your work on the test. Blue Book, you don't. So it's just a little more rudimentary. I hope it keeps making progress, but this is why paper doesn't break. Please opt into paper when you can. And you're also just going to be getting likely closer test sites to you. How did the exams differ in content? Well, here's an ACT reading passage. This is from Call of the Wild by Jack London, and actually not too bad. The prose is accessible, the story is interesting, very different than some of their other passages, which are Supreme Court justice opinions from 2 centuries ago. Still, this is the stuff of teenage nightmares. 400 to 600 words. It is from an older text, I think 1903. 10 questions tagged to this text, and you're reading this at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. SAT has shorter passages, and this is by design. They wanted to make their test feel lighter, breezier, easier to teenagers, again, to lure teens to take the SAT. Just because it looks easier doesn't mean it is so, though. I would argue that having less context to answer a question means that the psychometricians can author a tricky trap answer that hinges on a slight misinterpretation of a single word in a short passage. Basically, College Board, like I said, has been at this a century. They know how to make something look easy when actually it's hard. The both exams test the same dozen or so grammar and editing rules, and we see that students can make pretty strong early progress on the verbal sections or the English sections simply when they go back to sixth, seventh, eighth grade and relearn some grammar rules. You're not doing that right now in your high school, and for good reason. You're doing things that are far more important, such as advanced literary analysis, writing essays, but that's not what the test tests. And I can't blame teenagers for not knowing their commas because they don't have the best role models. Parents, guardians, I'm sure many of you can recognize this famous first line where, indeed, Charles Dickens himself makes a dozen comma splices. He would not have gotten a very good score on the ACT or SAT. The math differs mostly in terms of where the exam chooses to focus. The SAT goes deep into deep into a narrow amount of math, basically algebra. Lots and lots of algebra on the SAT. The ACT also does test algebra, but covers a broader breadth of high school math, namely by covering more geometry. For either exam, though, you can't really trust that you have a true baseline that's reflective of your academic readiness until you've been through maybe a semester of Algebra 2. You do need to know your exponential growth and decay. You do have to be pretty good at FOIL and factoring. Both tests test that. And that typically comes through the repetition and what you learn in the first semester of Algebra 2. This is the optional science section, and one glance at it, I hope, is enough to be self-explanatory for why, of the 4 sections, ACT chose science as the one to make optional. When you are taking science, though, keep in mind that it's not really a test of how good of a scientist you are. It's not a test of whether you belong in a pre-med program and can become a doctor someday or can't. I've seen plenty of students who are setting their sights on rigorous college pre-med programs who kind of crash and burn when they first take the ACT science section, feel really bad about it. Really, it is a close reading test with lots of mean traps where what you need to do is learn how to cut through the clutter with sharp active penciling and process of elimination strategies, and then it shines through. I often get asked, well, what if my student wants to do something STEM related? Only ACT has a science passage on it. Should we be opting for ACT over SAT because there's science? No. You should be opting for ACT or SAT based on your diagnostics. Colleges don't care. That includes programs at colleges. They see right through this thing, trust me. Okay, so here we are. This is where everyone should try to get to. When you get to this is up to you. Fall of junior year is fine after you take the practice ACT as well as your PSAT. Some students will do it earlier. That's also okay, especially if you're through Algebra 2. But you got to go through this exercise because by doing it, you will double your score gains with half the amount of work. And so the way it works is this. You try them both. If a student gets a 1200 SAT and comes in with a 22 practice ACT, that student favors the SAT. Forget about ACT. I get it, you still have to take it as a grad requirement, but you don't have to use your ACT score then at the colleges you want to apply to. Prep for the SAT. This is important enough that I want to give you a little bit of practice doing it yourself. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. And here we have two test cases, Lisa and Joel. Lisa has a 1350 SAT, a 32 ACT. Joel, any parents, guardians recognize the source material from Joel? Joel has a 1240 SAT and 26 ACT. So please take a minute. I'll give you a full minute here and bring the concordance back up. What would you advise Lisa to prep for? What would you advise Joel to prep for using this concordance? All right, 10 more seconds. Okay, it's okay if you didn't get through both of them. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here and share the results with you. Interestingly, with Lisa, the wisdom of crowds prevails. Lisa does favor ACT per concordance, and that's a great choice for her. And Joel, good job, everyone. Wisdom of crowds prevails again. He does land in the judgment call zone. So this is a common scenario. 50% of the time, students will land in the judgment call zone. So how do you break a tie? A good step is just to ask the teenager. I hesitate to use the language, which exam do you like more? But maybe phrase it as, which exam did you hate a little bit less? And usually a teenager will have an opinion. Um, you can also look at test dates, but I also finally like bringing data to the table. So what I'm going to show you here is a score report that you get and will get when you take a practice ACT. You get a lot more data, which is really useful for efficient studying and helping route yourself toward ACT or SAT than what you get from when you take an official ACT. So of course, you see your scores. This will populate if you take a practice ACT and then also put in your PSAT scores. You'll be able to see which way you're routed. You'll see how you perform percentile wise, but what I really like is when we get into the weeds here. Why don't we go over the math section? So here we break down the different types of math and show both their concentrations as well as how students performed on them. So this is a student who aced trigonometry and coordinate geometry, which is great, but those are not the big ticket items. Pre-algebra is most heavily tested on ACT, and so that's where the student should be marshaling their study efforts. Look at this too when you get it, because this shows you if you dropped any low-hanging fruit. So the heights of these bars indicate how easy or difficult a question is? Basically by comparing you against similar scoring peers. Lower bars are a lot harder, and sure enough, we see the student missing a lot more questions later on in the exam. I wouldn't be too concerned about this stuff at the end. Not until the student has cleaned up this easier stuff at the beginning. I mean, here's question 14. 86% of similar scores got this question right. Good one for the student to go over. Often made some silly error, need to brush up on a formula, something like that. I also like looking at when a student fell for any traps. So you can take a look when you get your score report. How many magnet icons do you find? Magnet icons are when there's a trap answer that, like a magnet does, pulls a lot of students to it because it's designed to look right. A classic one is it will be a question asking for area, and one of the answer choices will be perimeter. So a student can do everything right and say, I got it. My answer matches, but they're not solving the right question. They're giving perimeter when the question asks for area. Okay, so again, here's the practice test. Please make time for that. And you can go ahead and register for that first weekend in November. After choosing ACT versus SAT, your next job is to build a testing timeline. But I'm going to take a brief detour to give you just some guidance about what's going on with this enhanced ACT. In fact, I already saw some questions in the chat about science, and it's like, okay, Eric, you're asking us to err on the side of taking the science section, but what if it's not my teenager's best? What if the score is severely misaligned with the English, math, and reading? Can I suppress the science section? So that's a common question. We'll go over that. Here's where the science testing landscape is right now. As I mentioned, Boston University, Pomona, Georgetown requiring it. Some other schools, Duke, Michigan State, recommending it. And then we have policies like, oh, Brigham Young, which is not going to look at it at all. You can take it. They're not going to look at it. Boulder, they will look at it for current seniors. They're not going to look at it at all for current 2020 for 2027s. I suspect over time that more schools will start doing what Boulder and Brigham Young did, but not yet. Not for the class of 2027. It's still going to be in play, especially in selective contexts. So here's that question. What if science is my low score? Can I hide it? And the answer is pretty much yes. This has to do with how scores are reported. Most colleges use what's called the Common App. This is basically a collection of colleges that all embrace the same test and application reporting website. And part of the Common App asks you if you want to report your test scores. The phrasing of how they ask if you want to report your science score is very important because all they're saying here is, would you like to report an ACT science score, yes or no? They do not ask, do you have an ACT science score? They're not trying to out anybody. They're just saying, do you want to give us one? So you could have an ACT science score and just say no, and then you don't have to report it. Now things get a little stickier than that, especially at the highly selectives, some of whom have policies where they recommend or require you to send in your entire testing record. But they're anomalies. For the most part, you do have power to suppress your science score. This is going to make everyone's head spin, but I don't want to shy away from complexity because it is a complex time right now with the ACT science being optional. What I'm showing you here is a forecast of a student who does the right thing, takes the test a couple times. Of course, they're only taking the core or enhanced version of the exam because this is 2026 and that's all that's available. In February, they take the test, get a 30 English, 30 math, 30 reading. Thus, they get a 30 composite. They take science, but science is reported separately as a 20, not included in the composite. You log into act.org, it's going to say your composite score is a 30. That's it. And also you have a 20 science. Hoping to improve, they take the test again in April, and they do. They get a 31 English, 32 math, 34 reading. Now their single test score is a 32. That comes from averaging the 31, 32, and 34. They didn't improve in science. They got a 20 science, and their super score is also a 32. That is pulling from only the April exam. They take the test one more time. They get a 34 English, a 34 math, a 30 reading. Now their single test score in June is a 33 with a 20 reported as science separately. Their super score, though, is a 34. Can anyone figure out why? We're pulling the 34 English, the 34 math from June, but we take the 34 reading from April. That gives you the super score of a 34. You log into act.org, it will show you your June score is 33, but your super score is 34. Okay, great. So what are college students going to see? Okay, brace yourselves. Let's say the student's applying to Duke. Duke is test optional. They encourage you to send in the science. So the student says, okay, well, they encourage it. I'm going to send it in. They super score your ACT, and they will include science in your composite. If you show them science, it gets recalculated into your composite, even though it was pulled out by the ACT. That means that look at this right here. Duke would actually read this student as a 31 super scored. Why? Because they would take the 34 English, the 34 math, the 34 reading, and the 20 science. That 20 would pull it down from a 34 to a 31. The student's also applying to University of Texas, Austin. Here, UT requires testing. They don't require the science section. Score choice is okay. Score choice basically means that you don't have to send your entire testing record. You can pick and choose which official test dates you want to send. But they don't super score. So Texas would see this student as a 33. Why? Because they don't super score. They would only look at the student's June 26 core ACT. Finally, the student's applying to Penn. Penn also requires testing. Science is optional. Unlike Duke, they do not include science, though, in the super scored composites. So if you look here, Penn would evaluate this student at a 34. Why? Because they would take the 34 English, the 34 math, the 34 reading from April, and thus get a 34 super score, exactly as it appears on act.org. So I don't mean to complicate things, but just know that at the end of the day, those determining your ultimate score is not act.org. It is the colleges. And 4,000 colleges and universities do not travel in the same direction. They all have their little quirks and idiosyncrasies for how they're going to view your test scores. And that's especially true now that we have that extra binary decision of with and without science. Okay, we are on to step 2, which is you need to figure out how to make time for this. I consider this the hardest step, and it's certainly harder than any question the ACT or SAT can throw at you for obvious reasons. You are dealing with the most precious resource, which is your teenager's time and energy, which is severely limited. And there's a lot of other important things to put that into. So to minimize the amount of time that you're putting into testing, it's a good idea to build out a plan before you start studying for it. And a good way to build out a plan is just start by taking a look at when test dates are offered. So keep in mind that there's an extra ACT for you, April 15th, 16th. That is 2026. That's for juniors, the graduation required ACT. But what I'm showing you here is that there's lots of options to take both ACTs and SATs. Keep in mind you're only traveling one of these paths, down ACT or down SAT. Please do not travel both of them at once to try to be an overachiever. Not the time to be an overachiever. Colleges will not give you any bonus points for furnishing both official ACTs and SAT scores. So a good way to start figuring out when is the right time for your teenager to test as well as prepare is to start at the finish line. You need to have your tests done by early fall of senior year. Why? Because that's when early action and early decision deadlines are typically due. That means you need your test scores and have them in hand, know what you've gotten, given the testing agencies time to grade them by October. So that means your last ACT is September, your last SAT is the early October one. It's a good idea, and I consider this universally useful advice, which is to get a super score then by the end of your junior year. This means that you've prepared for the exam, taken it twice, not 7 times, 2 times, get the super score out of two. And then you have time to cross-reference your scores against the profiles of the colleges you want to apply to and determine whether you need to take it one more time while still having time to do so. So to give you some examples, back to Joel. Joel has a really, really busy spring of junior year. So he wants to prep starting now-ish and get ready for the December SAT and the March SAT, and that's fine. He will achieve the goal of having a super score by the end of junior year, whereas Elle is busier in the fall of junior year, so she decides to take exams later in the spring, and she's at the same place Joel is, fulfills the goal of getting her super score with plenty of time to see if she needs to take it one more time. So notice 2 times, 3 times, that is a reasonable amount of times to take an official ACT or SAT, not 5 times, not six, not seven, not eight. And believe me, I have seen 8, I have seen more than 8, not due to our guidance, but because people overinvest in these tests. They go in too early, they start taking them too early, and inevitably you see the same thing. It's long strings of stalled scores, and it's not like colleges will really penalize the student so much, right? They have bigger fish to fry and other things to look at, but what could the student have done better with their time? I'm going to give a little brief visibility to high scoring students, and not all high scoring students are the same. Most students, honestly, I feel are what I would call traditional high scorers. And not to crassly put students into buckets or use pithy horse icons here, but to really try to communicate what I've seen over a decade in this, is that a lot of students who are aiming for selective schools, they are not yet their future test-taking selves. Not in sophomore year, not in fall of junior year. They can get there. They can get into submittable range at selective schools. But usually the realistic pathway is that they need to take the test in the spring. They need to super score. They sometimes need to take it once more in the fall of senior year. There are students who start even higher, though. I mean, we're talking like top 5% starting scores and have really busy springs and really want to be done with this by the end of the fall. That for some students that can happen. It is rare though. And there are finally students, I call these unicorns. They exist and they're often very noisy about their test scores, but they want to take this over the summer before their junior year, prep as little as possible, and knock it out of the park and be done with it. For over 99% of even bright teenagers, even those who end up at selective colleges, one and done isn't going to happen. Dispel the myth of that. And also resist that peer pressure mill, the noisy neighbors, the alpha parents who can't help but brag that their teenager is a one and done unicorn. It's not that big of a deal because in truth, you have all the way until fall of your senior year. And who's going to have the strongest scores by the time you're done? Often it's a tie, right? And no, colleges don't care if you're getting it done early or if it's taking you until fall of senior year. They're not reading that deep into your application. Some form of preparation is wise. There are many ways to do this well. One piece of universal advice is however you do it, please build your preparation around a spine of high quality, full diagnostic tests. There's no other way to make reliable gains than to space out full-time practice tests. As you can imagine, this takes time. Often students have to take it on a weekend, so it's often skipped. But that just means longer test prep timeline for the teenager. So generally, one practice test per month. Think of this like if you're rehearsing for the spring musical. This is your dress rehearsal. If you are getting ready for trying to make a run deep into the playoffs, these are your scrimmages against tough opponents. So they're really important because you not only get the chance to implement everything you're trying to learn, even if you're not perfect at it right away, but you get a really great score report with wonderful feedback that helps you focus in on what you need to study next. Whether you prep with a company like us or another company, whether you do private lessons or group instruction, whether you try to do this with self-preparation, you're basically building your muscle in these 4 areas. And like I mentioned, the test only goes up through the first semester of Algebra 2. It's not throwing differential equations at anyone, but don't put it past the psychometricians to not be able to write a really hard question about y equals mx plus b. They know how to do that. I've seen students in calculus get stumped by basic algebra, not because the math is advanced, but because the authorship of the question is tricky. This means you need strategies. What do you do when the proper mathy way just isn't working? It's just not getting you to the right answer. Do you have a way to get to the answer anyway, say by working backwards from the answer choices, by turning variables into numbers and generating test cases? The test is designed to get you off your game too. The cheapest, easiest way they do that is by not giving students enough time, but there are other tricks as well. That means that students, you need to kind of build up your sense of how the clock works. And you have to have sharp time management strategies because that the test kind of changes that up on you section by section. What I'm going to show you now is a heat map of the ACT, and the scattering of mica and Ike candied colors illustrates a fundamental truth about ACT English, which is it doesn't get harder as you go. So remember when we were looking at that score report on ACT Math and the questions at the end were a lot harder than those at the beginning? Not true for English. Easy, medium, and hard scattered throughout, which means that your time management strategy for ACT English has to be different than what you would do for math. For English, count how many passages there are, look at how much time you have, and just make sure you parcel out your time evenly by passage. What I'll sometimes see sincere students do who are used to finishing tests on time because that's what your teachers allow you to do in high school, they will think they need to get everything right and finish it, and they'll fall into, say, question 6 on form code F. I call this like a hard question quicksand, where they are they know that they're not confident in their answer. So they try the question again, maybe a third time. They sink too much time into it, miss the question anyway, and then don't get to some of the low-hanging fruit at the end. So this takes some discipline. You don't have to be perfect to get an awesome score on the ACT or SAT. It takes some discipline to move on and make sure you're abiding by your strategies. Math is different though. Look at how math goes from easy to medium to hard. And yet, an easy point is worth just as much as a hard one. They all just count as one raw point. So what I've seen students have success with, even bright students who are aspiring to competitive business or STEM or engineering programs, is deliberately not finish the test. Who cares about those last 5 questions? Your score can weather you guessing on 5 questions if you take that time you would have spent struggling with those questions and likely missing many of them, and then give yourself more time early on in the test when the test is easy and you can be perfect. Don't make the dreaded careless error, in other words. So once you've started preparing for and taking official exams, it's time to figure out when your quitting point is. Unfortunately, your quitting point is not when you get a perfect score. It is unrealistic and frankly impossible for students to just with sheer work ethic get themselves to perfect scores. The test isn't designed that way. Rather, your stopping point is when you hit the law of diminishing returns. And although that's a little different for every student, I'm going to give you some forecasts on what that typically is. All students, though, looking to maximize their scores are not going to get there really unless they superscore. Superscoring, again, is the cobbling together of subscores for multiple official sittings. Technically, on the ACT, then, with an English, math, and reading, your superscore could be from 3 official sittings of the ACT. On SAT, there's only a math and verbal, so it would be from 2 official sittings. Most colleges superscore these days, so it very much is a boon to you, but selfishly to them, because then they get to boast about having higher institutional averages. So when do you hit the law of diminishing returns? When is enough enough? Well, one way to look at this is by starting with what most students can do with a reasonable amount of effort. If we take a student who's starting at an average score, a 19, I would expect that with reasonable effort, decent follow through, that student could have the distance to a perfect score by percentile by the time they take their first official exam. To make this concrete, there are 44 students behind, um, 44 students behind the student, 56 in front of the student. That means the student should be able to cut that lead in half and get to a 73rd percentile score. Might be a little higher, great. Might be a little lower, no big deal. That student then should try to, with super scoring, do it again and move into an 80th or so percentile score. That is reasonable to do. I wouldn't expect, though, a student to be able to turn a 19 into a 34. That is unreasonable. Unfortunately, nor does that need to happen, right? Like we showed earlier, colleges not super duper impressed by perfect or near perfect scores. When you do have a student who's starting in a high scorer bin, so to speak, though, it's the same principle. The students should try to have the distance to a perfect score by percentile in half, only now you're so close to the ceiling, there's less room for you to go. That student then should try to move from the 91st to the 95th percentile, which looks kind of modest, kind of meager, right? Just a 29 to a 31, 2 points. I promise you, those 2 points are hard fought and hard won. When you're at high scores, you're doing nearly everything right, and it's really just the hardest questions on the test that are stumping you, which can be tricky to buff up to the extent that you can get them consistently enough to see a stable score gain. Same deal. I would advise the student with super scoring to try again and maybe move, say, to a 32, 33, maybe even a 34. Okay, it used to be the case that once you were done testing, you were done because you pretty much had to submit your scores to most popular schools, unless you were applying to a liberal arts college on the East Coast who has had a test optional policy for decades. Most popular four-year colleges require the ACT or SAT. These days, that's not the case. Most popular schools do not require the ACT or SAT, which means you're left wondering, am I better off sending in my score or am I better off withholding my score? To give you some data, here are relative admit rates of between cohorts of students who got in with test scores and without test scores. And a useful way to make sense of kind of a crowded graph is start at the origin with Northeastern, their early round in 2021, where we saw parity. Students with and without scores were getting in at the same rate. That is walking the talk of test optional. You are not disadvantaged by not sending in a score. Now follow the x-axis all the way to Georgia Tech and Emory and Boston College, where we see students getting in at 2 to 2.5 times the rate with and without scores. Words of caution here. This doesn't mean that the test score caused that 2 times advantage, say, at Notre Dame. Often it's the case that a student with a strong test score is really strong in other, frankly, more important parts of their college application, say the rigor of the classes they took, the grades they have in those classes. But colleges don't really mind redundant information, not when they're really busy and need to get through initial sorts of qualified applicants. So if all the test score does is reaffirm what the holistic review record is saying, that's okay. I'll point out too that if testing is not your jam, if you take your PSAT or your practice ACT and it comes in severely misaligned with what you're doing in your classroom, you have full authority not to deal with the standardized tests. I didn't really have that option because I wanted to go to a big national university that required the tests. Your parents and guardians, I'm speaking to you teenagers, probably didn't either. Their schools required the test when they were applying. These days, you have so much more flexibility than we did. There are lots of wonderful schools that would love to have you without a test score. And you can only go to one school anyway. Keep in mind that that gradient bar, it didn't even exist for me. It didn't exist for your parents and guardians, right? Because there was nobody getting in without an ACT or an SAT score. So you have that power. Okay. For popular schools, though, that are going back to requiring the exam or that are optional, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, really would rather see a test score, this is some of why and what they're seeing. What I'm showing you is data from UT Austin, and they did a really interesting thing that was unusually transparent, which is they showed how students with and without scores performed their freshman year at UT Austin. What they showed us is that the test score was predictive of how a student performed. In fact, it was dramatically predictive enough in having a nearly point higher GPA, students with scores versus without, and a lot less likely to be, I mean, let's be honest, on the verge of failing out under a 2.0 GPA, that they decided to go back to requiring. Um, Keep in mind, this is an enormous public research university, not a liberal arts college, not a smaller university. So this is not going to be universally applicable everywhere you apply. I have one more poll for you just to give you some no stakes, easy breezy practice on this submit or not game. I'm going to go ahead and launch this. One moment, please. Okay, so we have Linda, and we know almost nothing about Linda. I have stripped away everything that makes her a human. Sorry, I don't mean to do that. Of course, it's the human parts of her application that will matter more. But for the purposes of just getting down to quick and dirty practice, this is simplified. And here she is. She has a 1400 SAT. She has a 4.3 GPA, and she has an interesting hook in her app. She's a recruited swimmer. She's being recruited at Michigan, Syracuse, Tulane, and Duke. I'm showing you those four institutions' middle 50 ranges. And the question for you is, what does Linda do with her 1400 at each of these schools? I'll give you a minute. All right, 10 more seconds. It's okay if you don't get through all of them. Okay, thanks everyone for participating. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I'll share the results with you. Not surprising, we agree as a group to send in the scores to Michigan State and Syracuse. Tulane, it gets a little closer, right? It is a close call. She's just outside the 25th percentile threshold, but 55% of you argued in favor of submitting. Things get interesting at Duke, where suddenly she's 90 points below the 25th percentile cutoff, and we're arguing in favor of withholding. There's often not a right or wrong call here, and you'll never know whether you made the right or wrong call based on your admissions decision, because you could have gotten in had you made the other testing decision, or you might have gotten denied anyway had you decided to withhold or versus submitting. So you'll never know. But I'll just point out about Duke and Tulane, I suppose, that you uh, getting into it really means asking, what will they assume I'm withholding if I don't send in my score? Will Duke think, this student didn't send in her score. She is hiding a 1400 or a 1450 or a 1350 or a 1300. This is called score imputation. Colleges have admitted to practicing it, and I'm just talking about the purple unicorn schools here. You know, we're talking about these schools with single digit admit rates, where everyone's perfectly admissible, and it's kind of feels like luck of the draw who gets in and who doesn't. So thank you for participating in that. With that, those are the 5 main decisions, and please reach out to us. You are welcome to schedule consultations with my colleagues who can talk to you about your specific testing scenario. Please also get registered for that practice test. I'll leave you with this hopefully heartening remark, which is that if you by the time you are in fall of senior year, if you look back and think, thank goodness I didn't give testing an extra cent or second than it deserved, then you have done it right. It's far easier to overdo it than underdo it. And with that, Kim, if you want to have any remarks or talk about the Q&A at all.
Sure, yeah. I was trying to answer some of the questions as they came in. There's a few here that I believe you talked a little bit about in your presentation, and one of them was if you take science on the ACT and don't do well, do you have to submit your scores? I know you addressed that a little bit.
It's worthwhile to reiterate because it is really a point of confusion and frustration. And for the most part, you don't have to send your scores. Thank you to the coverage that you get from the Common App. I do need to say that there's a caveat at schools that require or recommend you send in your entire testing record or ask you to send in scores directly from the testing agency. Ohio State's an example. Then, sorry, your science score will be outed. But for most schools, you can suppress it.
Okay, and then here's another one. Just a question, were the ACT results that you showed the standard results form, or was that a Compass only service?
The practice test report that I showed is the Compass score report.
Okay, and those were the bigger questions that came in through the Q&A. Let's see. Oh, here's one. Did COVID admissions make reporting of scores for recent admissions somewhat inaccurate for a post-COVID world?
Good point. Really astute point. Yes, because when colleges stopped requiring the test, only students who had high scores sent in their scores, and so the institutional averages got inflated. As we've seen some colleges going back to requiring and it looking more like a pre-COVID world, we've seen their middle 50s come down.
Absolutely. And I know a big one for us is Ohio State this year, always in our top 5 for where students apply. So we'll see those scores. I'm sure that range is going to drop down a little bit this year. Okay, so it looks like that is all of the questions that have come in. Um, so with that, I think we can wrap up here and one last one. One last one. I love it. Let's get to the last one and then we'll cut this off here. What are the best sources for realistic scores for recent admissions?
That would be the link that we have to our 400 popular schools. I showed you that earlier when we looked up Wisconsin and some of those others.
Absolutely. And I can also say that for all of our families in District 113, we use My Learning as our college and career platform. And if you wanted to look at the scattergrams within Maya, we do have information for every college that we have people applying to that will show just our school averages and information for students who have been accepted. So that's also very helpful just to get a more local point of view as opposed to the national. They're very similar, but I think it's helpful to see how our students are doing at these schools as well. Okay. Oh, now see there's a few more that came in. Um, why shouldn't we take both an ACT and an SAT to choose between them?
You absolutely should. That's what you should do. Just take them in practice test format, not official exams, unless you're doing the PSAT.
Perfect. And will the slides be shared? We will be sharing this presentation with you. Within a couple of days, it will be on our, for both HP and Deerfield's prospective CCRC website. So that information will be there for you. And what sites or places, courses do you recommend the most for studying for SAT and ACT?
I mean, obviously, I'm unbiased, so, but there's lots of good ways to do it. Just please start with practice tests. You're welcome to reach out to us for prep. There's lots of other good prep companies out there. Just do something. Don't use the wing it method.
There's lots of good prep companies, but I am very biased as well. And we've been working with Compass for years, and we've had a solid relationship. And I could say our families that have chosen to work with Compass, it's been a very positive thing. I've never heard one negative piece of feedback. So I would strongly recommend Eric and Compass and what they do.
Thanks, Kim.
Sure. What happens if you don't take the PSAT junior year and just focus on the ACT?
You just haven't then gone through the exercise of determining whether the SAT is in fact a better fit for you, and you may have folded on the opportunity to find you know, a higher score on the SAT and thus a shorter pathway to better scores.
Sure. Okay, and we'll take this as our last question. Someone just asked about cost associated with using Compass.
It's around $1,000 for a small group course, and those are 2 months long. Private tutoring can range from 1,000 to many thousands, just depending on the scope of the program and how many lessons are recommended.
Okay. So with that, I am going to cut off the Q&A for tonight. We've heard a lot of great information from Eric, so I do want to say thank you to Eric for being here and presenting that wonderful information to our families. We're very lucky to have our partnership with you and Compass, and we appreciate all that you do for us every year. So thank you for helping us out, Eric, and for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.